Welcome to the 1980s, famous for shoulder pads, neon leggings, and Return of the Jedi. But most importantly, on July 15th, 1983, Nintendo released the NES. What makes a NES so special? Aside from its power to make you succumb to a heavy dose of nostalgia, this elderly console arguably saved gaming. It was a hero the industry needed, but didn't deserve. Oh yes, this is a tale of innovation, tragedy, and gritty determination. Innovation. It all started with the Famicom. On July 15th, 1983, Nintendo released the Famicom. What? Nintendo released the Famicom the same day they released the NES? No, they did not. As you probably already know, the NES and the Famicom are one and the same. Sure, there's some slight differences between the two, but that's like claiming identical twins are not identical because one has a freckle on their nose while the other does not. They're the same console, just a little different. While we're on the topic, in researching this video, I stumbled across an article by Kotaku, and in the comments there were a lot of Legend of Zelda players who'd all face the same problem. You see, in the US Zelda guide, players were told that Pols' voices were sensitive to loud noises, leading to players to try to beat these creatures by setting off bombs, only to see no result. What the guide was trying to say was that players had to yell into their console's microphones to scare the creatures, except the NES didn't have a mic. That was a feature of the Famicom. Just thought that was a fun little bit of information. Anyway, back to the story at hand. In 1983, Nintendo released the Family Computer, otherwise known as the Famicom in Japan, where it did great. Seeing the Famicom's success, Nintendo figured that they should bring their consoles over to the West as well. Tragedy. You see, the North American gaming industry crashed in 1983. Why? Too many bad games, too many bad consoles, it was just a lot of bad. Keep in mind, this was at a time when consoles like Atari didn't have complete control over what games were developed for their console. In this day and age, you can't buy a game for your PlayStation or Xbox without the company's logo plastered on it for consumers to see. This way they know that it is an official PlayStation or Xbox game. But back in the 80s, that wasn't the case. Pretty much everyone could develop a game for Atari if they wanted to. And they did. Oh boy, they did. The gaming industry was doing great, and as you can imagine, people wanted to profit off of that. To put it simply, quantity ruled over quality, and the market was oversaturated, leading to the industry crash. There's a lot more we could say about the 1983 crash, but we're not going to. Not yet. That's a different topic for a different day, different video. Instead, we'll focus on how Nintendo may have saved the entire gaming industry. Gritty determination. Read up a little on the topic, and you'll see plenty of articles poetically telling you that, like a phoenix rising from the ashes, Nintendo emerged to save the day. Which isn't wrong, but it certainly isn't accurate. You see, at the time of the crash, most folks dismissed gaming as a fad, and Nintendo had the daunting task of convincing them otherwise. No easy feat. Consumers were wary of buying new consoles and games because they had seen too much bad, and the toy stores didn't want to go back to the console business because they'd lost lots of money off of gaming. So no, Nintendo did not dramatically rise from the ashes strong and ready to save the day. In reality, they clawed and scrambled their way out from beneath the heavy rubble that was Atari's mistakes. This is where we introduce you to our hero, Minoru Arakawa. Minoru Arakawa. He was Nintendo of America's first president. He was hardworking, determined, striving to bring some variation of the Famicom to the United States. It was a tough job, but someone had to do it. First, Arakawa tried to introduce the AVS, a console adapted to look different and appeal more to the American market. But it did terribly at the 1984 Consumer Electronics Show, so Nintendo had to try again. So that was a bummer. But Arakawa didn't let it get him down. He had a job to do. After going back to the drawing board, Nintendo settled on the NES, which they showcased at the 1985 Consumer Electronics Show, where it flopped again. But did this get Arakawa down? No sir, it did not. Arakawa marched on, riling his team up, assuring them that the NES would be really big. And so Arakawa and team pressed on. They figured that the stuffy adults at the electronics show just didn't understand. But kids would. Kids would love their console. They set up a focus group in New Jersey where Arakawa watched kids play the NES, only to hear one of them declare, "This is shit." And that was almost the end of the NES. Arakawa was disheartened and nearly gave up on the project. Luckily for us, Yamauchi convinced him to continue. So continue he did. But let us just take a moment to collectively hate on that one child that temporarily broke Arakawa's heart. Seriously? Screw you, kid. Despite the failures of the focus group, Arakawa and team carried on. Convincing stores to sell the NES was a struggle. So Arakawa told stores that Nintendo would stock stores, set up displays, and that they didn't need to pay until after 90 days. After those 90 days, stores only needed to pay for the units that they'd sold and could return whatever was left over. It really doesn't take a fancy business degree from a fancy business school to understand that this deal was crazy. Still, stores were difficult to convince. Arakawa and team convinced buyers, managers, and company vice presidents to sell their project, all while working on rebranding consoles for skeptical American market. They rebranded, they threw in a little robot and a zapper gun, and they advertised. Another genius move by Nintendo was implementing a lockout chip, which gave Nintendo control over the software that could be played on their console and prevent the use of unlicensed or pirated games. Developers couldn't just make a game for the NES. No, developers needed to pay a licensing fee and have their game approved by Nintendo. This way, Nintendo could supervise the quality and the amount of games developed for the NES. After this, there was a Nintendo seal of approval on all Nintendo games. Essentially, they assured that there was no way that the crash of 1983 could repeat itself. With this new advertising and the lockout chip, Arakawa and his team worked, struggled, and fought to bring the NES first to New York, and then slowly through the rest of the country. It was a slow, tedious process, but by 1989, 1 in 4 American homes had a NES. And not only did this increase to 1/3 of American homes just 1 year later, Nintendo had people interested in home consoles again. By 1992, the gaming industry was worth more than $5 billion US. All's well ends well, right? Right. After the NES was introduced, the gaming industry built back up. Sega came in with the Genesis, Sony and Microsoft developed their consoles, and gaming is more popular than ever, and gamers can earn a bucket load of money. So yeah, you could say it ended pretty well, all because of the NES, and Arakawa and his team. Things did almost go differently, however. Back in June 1983, Nintendo was actually discussing a partnership of sorts with Atari, where they would release the Famicom under the Atari name. Luckily, the deal fell through, and Nintendo continued to push the console on their own. If you were a kid in the 80s or 90s who grew up in the US, chances are you either owned a NES or knew someone who did. If you did experience the golden age of gaming, I would love to know what your favorite NES game was. Let me know in the comments. Or were you, like me, too young to really appreciate this retro age of gaming? Either way, let us stroll down memory lane together. Still craving some NES content? Check out our NES videos.